Good evening. Yeah, I cut my hair. Okay.
Which one?
All right. Tonight, we are going to kind of introduce the summer series, and we are going to talk about sort of the I don't know if inspiration is the right word, or the motivation behind the series, and kind of where all this came from. But unsurprisingly, if you've been paying much attention, this is all going to come back to the kingdom. And the series that we did and we looked at on the kingdom of God, the kingdom being here right now, an invasive force. The kingdom is the spiritual force in the world right now that is changing people's lives and can bring life to places that are dying and can bring light to places that are dark. All of that, if you if you want, you can just go watch all 5 hours of my preaching on that subject and upload all of that for this summer. Because I think that is where, well, I know, I picked the theme and got it signed off on. So that's where the inspiration for the theme for the summer came from. Now, I am not original. I did not come up with this, right? I'm not the person who thought of this. But as I was learning all these bits and pieces, they all kind of started falling into place together. So with all of that, what we're going to talk about this summer, what we're going to talk about tonight, next week, and every speaker should speak on for the rest of the summer, if they follow the prompt, so to speak, is this idea of spiritual disciplines. Now, this is a word that if you are not steeped in church history or church tradition, that kind of thing, you might not be super familiar with. It's sort of making a comeback lately, but mostly it has to do with the acts that Christians do in their life that will help them grow spiritually. So when we talk about spiritual disciplines, broadly speaking, that's what we mean. I'm going to read you I call it a blurb, the blurb that I sent out to all of our speakers when they agreed to speak. I sent them this so that they understood what the theme was and they could pick their topic. I told them, our theme this year is spiritual disciplines. For centuries, Christians have understood that our faith does not grow without practice. This is a concept that we're familiar with in sports. If you don't practice, you won't get better. Seemingly insignificant practice slowly transforms you into a better athlete. Spiritual disciplines are the common daily practices that we can do to be transformed into a person who looks more like Jesus. One of the best examples of this is prayer. When we practice prayer, it may seem insignificant, but the more we practice, it has an ability to transform us. Fasting, rest, fellowship, meditation, and many more are physical acts that we can do to work on our spirit. How do you practice better self-control? Fasting is an excellent discipline for that. How do you value people the way God does? Fellowship works great. How do you get better at peace? Rest is a practice that can help with that. Our hope is that through this summer series, the church will be equipped with new tools for growth, and that we will all look more like Jesus because of it. So that's our summer series in a nutshell. And there are going to be a different topic each week that hopefully the speaker will be able to present on that subject with that idea in mind. What do we actually do to live like Jesus did and experience the transformation that he talks about in the scripture? This abundant life that we're supposed to have. So that's kind of where we're going to go. I'm really excited for it. Like Dad said, there are a couple of speakers that I'm excited for, and then there are a couple of topics that I'm excited for, and then there are a couple of speakers and topics that overlap that I'm excited for both. So those are going to be obviously the best weeks. Anyway, tonight, this is the sort of the introduction to this. I want to begin talking about, I suppose the question is, why are we dealing with this at all? Right? Why are we dealing with spiritual disciplines? Like, we know we're supposed to pray without ceasing, and from 1 Thessalonians, and we know that we're supposed to be people who give to people in need. Like, we know these things, and so what is it about this subject that is different than that? Why are we dealing with this as a subject? And I want to point to one main problem, and probably the way this is going to work is we're going to deal with sort of a really big, long introduction tonight, and then next week I'll use my spot on the summer series docket to talk about a subject. So we'll introduce it tonight, and then we'll start with an actual subject and look at that a little deeper next week. But I think a problem highlights the need. That's generally the way that my mind works. 80% of my lessons have the words build the problem at the beginning. And so we need to understand what the problem is to understand why these spiritual disciplines are going to matter or help or be important. So here's the problem as I understand it. Jesus made us some promises when he was here. One of the main ones is in Matthew chapter 11, where he says, we can skip down to verse 28. Come unto me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So, Jesus made us a promise here. He also promises in John 10:10 that he came. I hope that doesn't mean I said something wrong. I'm kidding. He also promises that he came not just so that we could have life, but so that we could have life more abundantly. That there is this good life, this easy yoke, this peaceful, restful existence that Christians are supposed to have because we follow Jesus. The problem is, most of you want that because most of you don't have it. Most of us don't have it. We live in a world where those people who have that existence stand out drastically. Like you are not a normal person if you are peaceful and easy and restful and have an abundant, easy life. It just doesn't look normal. Rather, what we see is that many of us aren't experiencing this at all. We experience higher levels of stress, higher levels of anxiety, higher levels of blood pressure. We experience heavier burdens rather than lighter burdens. I remember I was talking with the kids in class a couple weeks ago, and one of them, I think it was Nate, said something about a struggle he has and how before he was a Christian, he was like, I didn't even care because it wasn't even a problem. And then after I was a Christian, now I have the same struggle, but I just feel guilty about it. And I was like, oh, great. So the gospel came and gave you guilt on top of all the other, it didn't seem, and that was a brief retelling of a conversation, but that so often is the message that's preached. Hey, come to Jesus because then you can be imperfect and feel guilty about it. Heavier burden, more stress, more worry, more difficulty. And yeah, you're forgiven, but that seems a bit trivial sometimes in the wake of the world and the day-to-day experience that we are living. And this honestly rears its head in the most nasty way because the people, statistically, who experience this problem the worst, do you know what category they come from? Preachers. Preachers experience more busyness and hurry and stress and anxiety statistically than nearly any other profession. That's crazy because what message is being told loud and clear to anyone watching? More spiritual, more stressful. Now, we're not going to say that. I would never pitch that to somebody. But our lives are telling a pretty big story, aren't they? Preachers experience burnout and scandal and problems and stress at a higher rate than other people. The message is clear: more spiritual, more stressful. And that's a problem because it leaves us in this predicament where either Jesus was lying or we've got some other thing going on. Obviously, it's never that Jesus was lying. Something is wrong in our understanding or in our application of this promise he made to us. I think one of the things that is wrong in our understanding of his promise is something that we've talked about recently, and it has to do with suffering. An easy life does not mean a life void of suffering or frustration. And that's really important. Second pitch for lessons of mine on YouTube. If you want to chase that rabbit a little bit more, you can go listen to those lessons on YouTube. But the other thing is what I think what I want to deal with tonight, and that is we have this divide in the way that we look at what it means to follow Jesus. Jesus wants us to take his yoke upon him and to follow him. And he tells us that's easier and less stressful and better. And yet we experience sometimes the opposite. Why is that? Why does that happen? I think, first and foremost, this comes back to our mindset. Because we have the wrong mindset when it comes to how we think about the world versus how Jesus thinks about the world. And there are two ways I think that emphasize this. The first one actually goes back to one of the lessons that we've talked about in the past, and it has to do with the way that we see the world as being categorized between the physical and the spiritual. That is a foreign concept to first century Jews and Jesus in particular. We talked about this a couple weeks ago, so I'm not going to go into all of it, but we have a tendency to categorize our world into worldly or secular things and then spiritual things, or regular, normal, physical things and then spiritual, godly things. And the problem with that is that it renders most of our life secular or non-spiritual at best. I mean, if everything that we do is categorized, then, well, we only have so many things that fit into this category of spiritual. And if work doesn't count and sleep doesn't count, then, well, that's most of our life. And therefore, by default, most of our life is not spiritual. I don't think that's how Jesus looked at the world. I think there's good evidence of this, that the New Testament writers didn't understand the world to work like this. Instead, they believed the world was fully integrated, physical and spiritual at the same time. When I say that, I mean that they are intimately connected, and you cannot remove one from the other. This is what I'm saying. When you are sleeping and you are resting, that there is a spiritual component to that. I think that's true. When you are doing the dishes after a long day, there is a spiritual component to that. There's a guy I've talked about before, because I really enjoy the way that he thinks. But his name is Jordan Peterson. He wrote a book called 12 Rules for Life. All right? Guess what one of the rules was? Make your bed. Now, you could sit here and you could say, well, that's just ridiculous. Like, rules for life, make your bed? You're just going to mess it up again anyway, which is my argument. I hate making my bed personally. However, there is something about that rule that hits on a broader thing than just pulling your sheets up, right? I'm a millennial. We don't even use sheets. We just have quilts. All right, anyway, listen, there's something bigger going on. Why is that one of his rules for life? He only picked 12 of them, and one of them was make your bed. Because there is something spiritual about making your bed. There is something going on in your world, in your life, because you are a spiritual, physical being, both at the same time, that making your bed does. Psychologically, we know that when someone orders their life, orders the things in their life, they are healthier mentally. Right? And so we can see the benefit in that regard. And so there's something, I would call it a spiritual component to ordering your life, making your bed. This is what I mean. Our world is not either physical or spiritual. The things we do are not one or the other. They are always both, all the time. You can't, if singing, right, worship, certainly that's a spiritual activity, right? Do it without your vocal cords. You can't. Do it without being present. You can't. Like there is a component to our spiritual things that requires physical engagement. There is a component to our physical things that requires or has an impact spiritually. This is, I think, mostly evident in Ephesians chapter 6, when Paul talks about the whole armor of God. Right before this, he discusses the battle that is going on in the world. And he says that in verse 11, we're to put on the whole armor of God of Ephesians 6 and verse 11. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood. This is not physical, it's all spiritual. We do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Therefore take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand firm. Stand, having fastened the belt of truth, and having put on the breastplate of righteousness, and as shoes for your feet, having put on the readiness given by the gospel of peace. In all circumstances take up the shield of faith, which with you can extinguish all the flaming darts of the evil one. Now, if the solution to the spiritual warfare going on, that sounds very big and scary, is truth and peace and righteousness, how do you do those things? I mean, you do truth by telling the truth. It's a physical engagement, right? Like, often it involves speaking, or it involves your actions. Your actions can do a lot of truth-telling. Often they do more truth-telling than your mouth. Like, how do you do truth? Well, you do it physically. It's going to require engaging with the world around you. How do you do righteousness? I mean, righteousness is something that's going to be like physical action. You're going to have to engage to do righteousness. How are you going to bring peace? Well, Jesus talks about bringing peace. Blessed are the peacemakers. How do you make peace? What does making peace look like? I remember when I talked about this, Donnie told me afterwards that Chandler, his grandson, I asked, does anyone have any peace sitting in their pocket? Did anyone bring any peace with them today? And he said Chandler was sitting there coloring and reached into his pocket and threw some peace out into the wind, which I thought was hilarious because he's listening and definitely didn't get what I was saying because he's 6. But listen, this is what we're talking about. Peace is not holdable, physical. It is a spiritual thing, but it is transmitted, it is done, it is grown, it is given, it is made physically with physical interactions between people. Sometimes there's this, I watch Survivor. I love Survivor because social experiments are exciting and it's a fun game. There was an episode of Survivor recently where one of the contestants has autism, and she says she sometimes goes into these episodes, and they resemble a panic attack, is kind of what you would see. And she tells this to one of the other contestants on the show and says, if I'm in one of these episodes, I need to be grounded, I need to be hugged, I need help calming down. And so this ends up happening during the show, and she has one of these episodes, and how does he bring peace to this situation? Well, this guy goes over and he hugs her, and he holds her, and he squeezes her hands, and it grounds her. He literally brought peace. He had it in his pocket, dare I say, but he did it physically. How do you show someone you love them without any physical action? You can't. This is my point. The physical and the spiritual are intimately connected. You cannot have one without the other. That's how Jesus saw the world, which is why Jesus never took any time to do worldly things. Are you telling me Jesus never ate or went for a nice walk? No, I'm telling you those things are spiritual. Everything Jesus did was spiritual. He didn't have a physical life and a spiritual life, a secular life and a spiritual life, a godly life and a worldly life. He didn't do that, not because he's Jesus, but because he didn't even conceptualize the world in that way. We break them up. That's us. That's an us thing. We categorize things as good and bad or spiritual and physical or regular and godly. That's not the way Jesus did it. Now, notice I want to be very clear, I'm not talking about sin. Sin is a different conversation. We're not talking about sinful and not sinful. We're talking about your everyday tasks being physical or spiritual. My argument is Jesus saw them, Paul saw them as being both at the same time all the time. Because we, in their understanding, are physical, spiritual beings. Spiritual beings in a physical body. And both of those things are working together in us and around us all the time. That's a lot. There's a whole lesson on that. I think I just preached half of it. Anyway, this is part of the mindset that I think gets in the way of us experiencing the godly life that Jesus talks about. The easy yoke that Jesus talks about. This mindset where we separate the physical and the spiritual is part of the reason why we don't experience the easy yoke. It's part of the reason why we don't experience the abundant life. Here's how that plays out, because the other thing that we do is we categorize things as big, important things and little, unimportant things. How many of you have been online enough to be aware of the one gorilla versus 100 men debate? Have you guys seen this? Well, I mean, if you haven't, that's the whole question. That's the whole prompt. Who would win in a fight? Hand-to-hand combat, 100 men or one gorilla? I'm going to tell you most of the discourse that I've seen, and most people I've talked to say, well, there's no way the gorilla loses. It's a monster. They're enormous. They're super strong. Like, they've got these teeth and these hands, and they're unbelievably big, right? I was talking to my brother-in-law, Blake, Courtney's sister's husband down in Houston, and he was like, dude, there's no way. There's no way. My immediate gut reaction was, I feel like the men would win, because 100 just seems like too many. That was the way I felt about it. But Blake was like, dude, it's a gorilla. Like, how are you going to beat a gorilla? Like, what are you going to do? You know, like, you're not going to be able to, like, tear his skin off. Like, he's got different, tougher skin, and he's stronger, and he's bigger. Okay. Most people that I have found who are experienced in the field of zoology and the study of animals are on my side. I'm just saying. Here's what they said. Obviously, a gorilla versus a man, it's not even close. It's not even a fight. I mean, the gorilla could tear their limbs off, right? But as you swarm the gorilla with 100 men, the sheer volume of the little things, in this case the humans, will overwhelm the impact of the bigger thing. Now let's broaden this to the actual concept here. We have a tendency to look at Jesus' life and say, I'm going to do the spiritual things that he does. And that goes back to our problem of physical versus spiritual. And then we take the spiritual things and we take the big moments, the big important things that Jesus does, like going the second mile or turning the other cheek. These really difficult, big, important teachings that Jesus does. And we're like, I'm going to do those big things. But in the rest of my life, I'm just going to live it normally, like everybody else, with the normal non-spiritual stuff. So not only do we take Jesus' teaching and parse out the physical and the spiritual, which is an incorrect thing to do, but then we take his spiritual things and we don't take his little spiritual things. We take his big spiritual things and we think, naturally, that a gorilla, because it's bigger, would defeat 100 little humans. And so we take the big things that Jesus does, the really challenging, spiritually mature things, and we aspire to those rather than the everyday little things that encompass our regular common things as well. And we think if we can do the big things, then we'll be like Jesus, and we ignore the little things. I think that is an incorrect perception. I think rather, if we do the little things like Jesus, that the big things will come more naturally and we will be more prepared. Here's the example. This is what it ends up looking like because of these two category errors. This is what it ends up looking like. It ends up looking like someone who wants to be like Mike, like Michael Jordan, which is a great song, right? They want to be like Mike. So what do kids, and we've all watched this, what do kids do when they want to be like Mike? Well, they go out and they get a basketball. And of course, they get some Jordans, because if you're going to be like Mike, you got to wear his shoes. And they lace them up the same way he laces them up. And then they go out and they shoot fadeaways for, 20 minutes. Or they decide that, man, I'm going to be like Mike. So what does that mean? Well, Michael Jordan was the most clutch player in the history of the sport, and he takes the last shot, and he makes the last shot. So if I'm going to be like Mike, I'm going to take the last shot, and I'm going to make the last shot. Okay, well, I'm going to be like Mike. He had a freakish vertical and looked like he could float in the air. So I'm going to practice floating in the air. I'm going to be like Mike. I'm going to learn to dunk okay. These are the big, awesome things that really did make Michael Jordan incredible. Do you know the things that made Michael Jordan incredible, though? Well, it's the fact that before the sun came up, he got 1,000 shots up at 5 a.m. And then he went and worked out. And then he went and had a really restricted breakfast with only the right kind of foods for his body. And then he met the rest of his team at 10 a.m. shoot around, having already gotten his shots up. He goes for second shoot around. Then he goes through his workout with his team, and then he goes through his, which of the things, the big things about Michael or the little things about Michael, will make you more like Mike? It's the little things. But because we have categorized physical, spiritual, right? And because we've broken down the spiritual into big things and little things, we're just shooting at these big things, trying to make fadeaways and hit the last shot. And we call that being like Mike. But what it ends up doing is getting you cut from the team because you aren't like Mike. Not yet. You haven't trained for 30 years. You haven't learned to shoot a fadeaway. You don't jump out of the gym, right? So then you try and do these things and you fail and you get cut and it goes poorly. I think that is the parallel to our spiritual walk, to our faith, to our life, maybe I should say. Because we try to go the second mile and then we fail because it's really hard to go the second mile for somebody who's taking advantage of you. Right? We try to turn the other cheek and then we fail because it's a whole lot easier to fight back than it is to restrain yourself. We try to cut sin out of our lives, and we fail because discipline in big moments of challenge is much harder than discipline in small moments of practice. And if we don't have the small moments of practice, we're not going to be ready for the big moments of challenge. So, this is what it ends up looking like. A little kid who wants to be like Mike by doing all the big fancy things he does. We are little baby Christians who want to be like our Savior, and that's a really great start. The way we go about it, though, because of the way we think about our world, causes us to miss that mark. And we then don't experience this abundant life and this easy yoke. What we experience instead is heightened levels of stress and a heavier burden, which is the exact opposite of what we were promised. The problem is always us. It's never Jesus. So, the other thing I want to mention is that this is not a new problem. The Jews had a burden on them. In the New Testament, as you read through, we've talked about this a little bit before, but the Pharisees were the religious teachers. They were the religious elite during the day. And the Pharisees had this idea, and this is what drove a lot of what they did. They had this idea that in order for God to bring his kingdom and restore the Jews and defeat the Romans, what the Jews had to do was have every member of God's family follow the law perfectly. And if they could just do that, then God would finally come. This was the Pharisees' motivation generally. If we could just keep the law the way God wants us to, then he would come and deliver us, and we would be raised up back to our former glory, and we'd have a new king, and the Messiah would come. All good things will happen. The only thing holding it back from the mind of a Pharisee were these stinking sinners. They look at the tax collectors, and they're like, dude, like, are you kidding? You're holding back the kingdom from coming. The prostitutes, right? The people of low standing in society. All of them were the reason the kingdom wasn't coming in the mind of the Pharisees. Because if you kept the Torah, then God would keep his end of the bargain and deliver you from the Romans. So if you're a Pharisee, that's your mindset, which is a bit sympathetic to the Pharisees, is it not? So then, as a Pharisee, well, I should say this, as a common Jew during that time, you'd experience a heavy burden, right? I mean, this is what you're being told. You failed this week. You're standing in the way of the kingdom. You are. That's a lot to carry. So you're an everyday common Jew, and you have got quite the load, because it's not just the 10 Commandments, all right? We're not just talking about not murdering. We're talking about all 613 of the Jewish laws that have to be kept perfectly. And you think about the way that this manifested itself. We get a glimpse into this culture at the Sabbath. John chapter 5, Jesus interacts with the Pharisees on the Sabbath, and it's this whole back and forth where Jesus is going to heal this man on the Sabbath, and the Pharisees are like these Sabbath watchdogs, and they're just like constantly lurking around, making sure no one breaks the Sabbath. They're doing more work on the Sabbath than they do any other day. They've got to be exhausted. Quite a heavy burden trying to keep an entire nation of people in check to 613 laws. That's a lot. Okay, the Pharisees were heavy burdened. The Jews were heavy burdened, and Jesus comes along. Like, this is my point, is they were experiencing the same kind of religious burden that we experience. Not for the same exact reasons, but in the same exact way. And so Jesus comes along, and this is his answer. Easy, simple. Matthew chapter 11. He says, "Come unto me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Man, if it sounded good to them, it should sound really good to us too. I don't know what you're thinking, but I would love an easy and light burden. That sounds like a great deal. A great deal. We get to show up, learn from Jesus, and receive this easy burden, this light yoke. Now, a couple of things we need to know about this passage. The first one, when Jesus uses the idea of a yoke, What we're talking about is not the yellow part of an egg. We're talking about the wooden beam that would be placed across the shoulders of a cow or an ox, which are the same thing. And they would put the wood across there, and they would connect two oxen together so that the ox could pull a plow, right? That was a yoke. They would yoke the ox together, and the ox would then do work. And so two things are going on here. One, Jesus is activating a picture. When he says, take my yoke upon you, he's talking about a tool, okay? The other thing is, when you talk about a yoke in this context, especially as a teacher, your yoke was the way that you interpreted and carried the law of God. And so we've talked about Hillel and Shammai before, and so we're not going to go into all of that. But Rabbi Hillel carried a yoke, a way that he read the Bible and a way that he understood it. Rabbi Hillel believed the first most important law was love God, and the second was love your neighbor as yourself. Rabbi Shammai carried a different yoke, a different way to understand the Torah. He believed love God first and keep the Sabbath was second, which had more of a connotation of follow the commandments, okay? So, these were the different yokes. At different times, actually, Jesus lines up on both sides of the rabbis' debate, the Hillel-Shammai debate. Jesus' offer here is for a yoke or an understanding of the law that is easy and light, not burdensome. But his solution to the problem is still a tool, right? Because if you go back to the picture of a yoke, like what is a yoke for in its fundamental state? It's for doing work. And in my mind, I mean, the last thing that you would want to give somebody who is burnt out and tired and stressed is more work, right? That seems a bit counterintuitive, as Jesus often does seem a bit counterintuitive. And so, it's like getting someone a retirement present, a construction worker, a hammer as a retirement present. Like, well, I want a pillow or a massage or, a vacation. I want something that isn't work. And it's interesting because Jesus doesn't give us, let me say it this way, rest is not his solution to weariness. That's weird. Because rest is a prominent theme in the Bible. I mean, rest goes all the way back to Genesis chapter 1 and the seventh day of rest. And Sabbath was instilled to give people a rest. And this eternal rest that we're promised with God for each, like that, you would think hard work, the solution is rest. Jesus doesn't seem to think that way. Jesus' offer to someone who is beat down by the burden of the teaching of the day is a different tool. A different tool. It's almost as if he's saying, rest won't help you because work isn't a problem. But the way that you're working is a problem. And so he offers a different yoke. Think of it this way. He's offering a different way to carry the burden of life. Right? He's not offering you an escape from life. This world's going to have trials. He's not offering you rest and peaceful, easy feeling for the rest of your life, and all we do is sing Kumbaya in some ethereal world. He's offering you a way to interact with this world that is different and easier. Not rest, a new yoke, a new way to carry the burden of this life. Because rest will help you for a moment, but a new tool changes your life. Think about this. Using the example of a yoke. Let's just imagine a farmer has to till the ground, right? By hand. He's got his tiller, and it's long, it's hard, arduous work. He can't get away from it because he's got to do the work to have the food, and it's brutal work. And someone shows up and says, "Hey, farmer, you look tired. Let me give you a vacation." That'd be great. And so you give the farmer a vacation, and in 7 days when he comes back, right back to it. Same brutal hard work. But what if you show up and you tell the farmer, "Hey, you look tired. Let me teach you about this thing called a tractor." You have literally just changed his life. You didn't give him rest. You gave him a new, better tool. Do you see the parallel? When Jesus introduces this idea of the easy yoke, he's not telling you that you're not going to work and that you're not going to have problems. He's telling you that he has a new way to carry those problems. and to interact with this world that will give you a better life. This is where these problems that we have come into play. Jesus does not expect us to follow him in only the big and only the spiritual things, but he expects us to follow him in every single little step that he does every day. We still have the same problem, and so the solution is not rest, but the solution is this easy yoke that Jesus promised. So how do we take advantage of it? I want to talk real quickly about one more sort of historical thing. Look at Luke chapter 9. That's what we're going to flip over there. We'll probably wrap up here in Luke chapter 9. This is the famous follow me passage. Luke 9 and verse 23. This is Jesus talking, and he said to them, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will save it. For what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits himself? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words, of him will the Son of Man be ashamed when he comes in his glory and the glory of the Father and of the holy angels. But I tell you truly, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the kingdom of God." You've got this offer from Jesus. His offer on how to experience the easy yoke, right? Follow me. Now, if you know a lot about this time period and religious teachers of the time period, you recognize that. And if you don't, this is what that means. To hear "follow me" was an invitation from a teacher or a rabbi to someone else to become his disciple, or his talmid would be another word. I heard a better translation of this word in English might be apprentice. Come apprentice under me would be a good way to understand the connotation. Because it wasn't just, hey, come to my school and learn for a couple hours and then go home with your certificate, right? It wasn't like you were learning in that way. It wasn't like follow me, every once in a while, or I'll teach you a lesson, we'll meet once a week kind of thing. A disciple, a talmid, when they were invited to follow a rabbi, were invited to apprentice under that rabbi for 24 hours a day until they graduated or failed. Like that was kind of the extent. And so often these were 13, 14, 15-year-old boys that would be invited to apprentice under a rabbi who at that point had shown promise, memorized the whole Torah, yada, yada, yada. We've talked about this before. But they were then invited to apprentice under a rabbi. And here's what that entailed. If the rabbi ate his breakfast cereal with his left hand, so did the talmid. If the rabbi went to the market on Tuesdays, so did the talmid, so did the disciple. If the rabbi taught in this certain way and spoke with this certain style of speaking, so did the disciple. If the rabbi slept on this kind of bed, so did the apprentice. It was not a weekly meeting to help you learn what I've learned. It was an absolute change of lifestyle for this kid who was likely a fisherman, a carpenter, some sort of family trade until he was called to follow a rabbi. So when Jesus calls us, he is not calling us to live the spiritual part of his life, all right? This isn't once a week meetings to study the Bible with him. When Jesus calls to follow him, he's not inviting you to only do the big things in his spiritual category of turn the other cheek and go the extra mile. When Jesus invites you to follow him and all the disciples that he invited, the invitation is, come eat how I eat, sleep how I sleep, live how I live, every step of the way. Not just the big stuff, not just the spiritual stuff, but the full life. The problem is that we often look at following Jesus as turning the other cheek, going the extra mile, loving our neighbor as ourselves, and we neglect the rest of his life. And so we don't experience the easy yoke because we don't live life in the pace, in the timing, with the focus. We don't live life with the mindset that Jesus did. We don't do the little things that Jesus did, so we don't do the big things that Jesus did. Look at a couple verses down. Look at Luke 57. Luke 9 and verse 57. Luke chapter 9 and verse 57. As they were going along the road, someone said to him, Jesus, I will follow you wherever you go. And Jesus said to him, foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. To another he said, follow me. But he said, Lord, let me first go bury my father. And Jesus said to him, leave the dead to bury their own dead. But as for you, go and proclaim the kingdom of God. Yet another said, I will follow you, Lord, but let me first say farewell to those at my home. Jesus said to him, no one who puts his hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the kingdom of God. Let me pause and give you one more illustration. It was a book I was reading, and the guy was talking about how every morning he goes out and he drinks his coffee on his porch. And he lives up in Portland, and everyone in Portland works for Nike, so everyone in Portland wears Nike. It's like constant Nike advertisements all over the city. He said he was sitting on his porch, and he says there's this group of runners, not like people who run, but runners. You know the difference, right? Like, he said they're decked out, head to toe in Nike gear. He says they look fantastic. He says they wear the clothes well. They look like they've got single-digit percentage of body fat, like they're in great shape, they're healthy. And he said, I look at them as I'm drinking my coffee, and I think, man, I want that. I would love to look great in some Nike athletic wear, you know? I would love to have a resting heart rate of 50 and just be incredibly healthy. You know, I would love to to wake up in the morning and go for a run and be energized by that, right? He said, then I considered what it costs to live that kind of lifestyle. Not just to have that life, but what is the lifestyle behind it? And he said, I remembered back the night before that I finished off a Coca-Cola while I binged Netflix with my wife until 11:30 in the evening. And then I thought, what did they do that night before? Well, they probably went to bed at about 9 and had one boiled egg for breakfast. He said, a quick cost analysis lets me know that while I might enjoy that life, I certainly don't want to live the lifestyle that requires me to get that life. This is the basic premise for this spiritual disciplines conversation that we're going to have this summer. When Jesus tells us to follow him, and he promised us this easy yoke and this good life, the only way to get those things, to have that life, is to also adopt that lifestyle that Jesus lived. Not just in the big moments, but in every moment of his life. And I think the reason we don't have the life that he promised often comes down to the lifestyle that he expects. I don't mean specifically here, I don't mean just we have sin in our life. We're selfish people. I don't mean just that. I mean we don't do the things that Jesus did. Like we don't sit down and do what he did. When he sits here and he talks to these people who are wanting to follow him, he says essentially as much. You want to follow me and do what I'm doing and have the life I have? Right? Like clearly there was something about Jesus that made these people in this story go, yeah, I want to be like that guy. I want to look good in Nike athletic wear, right? And Jesus said, cool. You want to follow me? Foxes have holes, birds have nests. I don't have a place to lay my head. Sound like a plan? You good with that lifestyle? If you want that lifestyle, you can have my life. Well, we've seen people walk away from Jesus over less. Hey, follow me. Okay, yes, I see that you have value, but first let me go bury my father. Listen, leave the dead to bury their own dead. The lifestyle that I'm inviting you to is going to require sacrifices that do not feel right sometimes, but it's going to lead to the life that I am living, Jesus might have said in the Cliff Notes. This is the premise of this conversation about spiritual disciplines. To be a disciple of Jesus, not just a follower, not just a Christian, whatever that term means nowadays in our culture, but to actually be a talmid, a disciple, someone who looks at the lifestyle of Jesus and achieves or aims for the life by doing all of the little regular things. To go back through all of the examples, if we want to be like Mike, we got to wake up and get up 1,000 shots in the morning before the sun. If we want to be like the runners, we have to be willing to give up eating good food. That's the way it works. I didn't make that rule. You can take it up with God when we get there. But listen, if we want to be like Jesus, we have to do the spiritual disciplines that he did. We have to live the lifestyle that he lived, unhurried, patient. And so as we get into this summer series, we're going to talk about things like simplicity of lifestyle. We're going to talk about things like confession as a spiritual discipline. We're going to talk about, obviously, prayer, disciple-making, worship. We're going to talk about celebration. We're going to talk about gratitude, sacrifice, fasting, rest, meditation. And hopefully next week we'll talk a little bit about a couple that I'm still deciding. We might do 2 of them, because 2 of them that weren't taken that I really liked. This is what we're doing this summer. We are learning the spiritual disciplines. We are learning the lifestyle of Jesus so that hopefully we can be transformed little by little to look more like Jesus and have more of the promises that he made us. Because the promises weren't deficient. We were. All right? And so that's what I hope we can do this summer. That's what I hope these spiritual disciplines can give us. And ultimately, no matter how much you work at being good enough or having this good life, if you don't have Jesus' blood cleansing you, it's all for naught. It might be a nice, more peaceful life, but it's not a saving faith that brings you into a right relationship with God. And so tonight, if you need to become a Christian or if you need prayers at the church, whatever you need, we love you and we want to help you. If you let us know what it is while we stand and sing.